The World Economic Forum is wrapping up its 5-day gathering in Davos, Switzerland, with many questions remaining about whether the talks will lead to any improvements in the state of the world. Our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, is there, and he joins us now for a wrap. And so the energy crisis has been a major talking point. Xolani, how is the energy crisis, crunch rather, going to be addressed?
Good afternoon, Duduzile. It's quite difficult to report from Switzerland in January without really mentioning the weather, that it's minus 15 degrees. But you're absolutely right when it comes to the major talking points here at the World Economic Forum. It wraps today on day 5, a number of delegates already on their way home. But the energy crisis was among the biggest talking points here in Davos, with one session that had South Africa's Mark Swilling talking about the energy crisis there back home and how we need to actually tackle it. As investors here have been asking questions, a lot of questions about South Africa's readiness for investments, and it's something that the Team South Africa really worked hard to explain in terms of what the government is trying to do to ensure some energy supply and some sustainability on that front. Not only South Africa is going through this crisis, but many countries in this region of Europe are going through an energy crisis, of course led by that Ukraine-China war. Mark Swilling had this to say earlier on when he was addressing a session on how the world should actually respond to the energy crisis.
And I think we need to think about this question of a just transition from a finance point of view, and not just from a welfare point of view of how we kind of mitigate the impacts on workers and do handouts. And that really takes us to the question of the allocation of capital. And my institution sits very much at the center of that, those dynamics on the African continent. The problem is that the global financial system is not fit for purpose. We have a poly-crisis, and the global financial system is functioning in a way that allocates capital in a way that does not reinforce all the good stuff that we want.
So energy is one thing, but another critical issue has been the debt crisis that many countries have found themselves in, and South Africa is no exception to the rule.
Absolutely, Tutuzile. When it comes to one of the major revelations here is that the biggest economy in the world, the United States, seems to be running quite a high debt ceiling. That is, of course, after the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine-Russia war. And just this week, there's been talk here that the United States could reach its debt ceiling by the end of this week. $34 trillion that they may have borrowed in terms of their debt. They are the most indebted country in the world. They are not alone, though, with many African countries still facing a debt crisis, including South Africa. Although when it comes to African countries, there is that hope that this year is expected to be better in terms of economic performance. For example, 121 countries were asked in a survey to list the 5 risks that are facing the world, and the debt crisis was the second most seen crisis by 121 economies around the world. So it's something that is quite topical. It's going to be quite interesting to see what kind of work is being done in the next 12 months to mitigate against those challenges. But the group chairperson of Standard Bank, Nonkululeko Nyembezi, had this to say during a session when there was a discussion about how African countries are going to actually go against the debt crisis that many countries are facing in the world.
I think that we are on the way. The direction, at least from what I hear in the room and what I see, is correct. What for me starts to become a little bit optimistic about this time is African governments have come to a point of the absolute limit of their capacity to do stuff. They do not have the means. They have to tackle debt as a matter of urgency. Inflation is a matter of urgency. In a scenario like that, it therefore opens the window, small window, for a private sector-led economic growth path. And I honestly cannot see how we accelerate African growth without that.
And of course, there is a lot of work that African leaders have to do to demonstrate that these were not just empty talks here at the World Economic Forum in Davos, that they will do all they can to make sure that those challenges that are brought on by a debt, a crisis that is engulfing the world, are not felt as deep as they are expected to be felt by the citizens of many countries on the continent. Back to you, Dudu, in studio.
Yeah, Xolani, before we let you go very quickly, with the way the rand dollar exchange rate is going, no chances of getting some Swiss chocolate from you on the last day of this meeting, are there?
Well, that is a possibility, as they are just throwing them at us at this stage as we are about to head back home with the rest of the 2,500 delegates to Tuzile.
Safe journeys. Thank you very much. Xolani Mbanjwa is Newzroom Africa's business editor.